The enemy of my enemy. The man's body hung limp, drained of strength, as Obexakeo seized him by the ankle and hurled him into the roaring furnace. Flames devoured him in seconds, the iron maw snapping shut with a hiss of vapor and ash. Around the chamber, rows of slaves remained frozen at their tasks, heads bowed. They had long since learned that to glance up was to invite the same fate. Silence, fear, and the scent of burning flesh filled the air. Obexakeo's fury knew no pattern or mercy. It struck without warning, sparing no one in the molten nightmare of the Forged Temple. His heavy frame moved with a mechanical gait, each thunderous step echoing through the smog-choked chambers. Orders erupted from the Vox amplifier grafted to his shoulder guard, distorting into a metallic growl. His power armor was painted in hazard stripes of yellow and black, scorched and slick with leaking fluids. Steam hissed from its joints, while jagged pistons hissed with violent rhythm. In one gauntlet he gripped a howling axe, its teeth gnashing with malice. From a mechanized limb on his back dangled a whip of raw lightning, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. The forge bellowed with fire and madness. Gouts of flame lit the shadows, while sparks cascaded from grinding colossi. Lava-bright metal streamed in molten rivers into vast molds shaped for destruction. Smoke choked the air, swirling around infernal machines and towering vats of war iron. Grotesque enforcers shuffled through the chaos, encased in vulcanized suits with round glass eyes and breath tubes feeding from tanks strapped to their backs. Their limbs moved with unnatural motion as they cracked barbed whips across the backs of the enslaved, droning orders in lifeless monotones. And yet, even here, the slaves endured. Skin stretched thin over bone, their eyes hollow but still defiant, they toiled on. Their survival was a quiet defiance, a fragile remnant of who they had once been before their chains, before the fall. None remembered how long they had been torn from the bastions of the Imperium. Days, years, lifetimes. It blurred beneath the black sun of this cursed world. Above them loomed a city too vast, too alien in shape, to be real. Just the sight of it had shattered minds, its jagged towers scratching the sky, its silhouette churning with smoke that rained soot and despair. Nearly 3,000 had been cast into this place known as Medjugorje, but fewer than a quarter still clung to life. Starved, lashed, and broken, they labored beneath a sky of smoke and fire, enduring a slow, deliberate execution by exhaustion. At the far end of the forge, a leering metallic visage roared with unholy rage. Within it, a demon thrashed, its essence trapped in a prison of gold-etched runes. Its fury turned into unending force. Its wrath drove pistons the size of buildings and stoked furnaces hot enough to melt adamantium. Flames danced across the bindings etched into the floor, and above, the demon's burning eyes watched every movement. Madness seeped from its gaze, and the madness fed the machine. For the masters of this place, the cost in lives was trivial, well worth the endless output of war steel. Every day, over 100 slaves perished, ground down by torment or consumed by the fire. But the Iron Warriors showed no concern. For each that died, thousands more could be shackled and thrown into the endless cycle of toil and death. The blackened floor trembled as 3 tracked haulers crawled into the forge, trailing rust-clogged troughs behind them. Rubber-masked overseers piloted the machines, their hisses muffled through coiled tubing. Even before the vehicles halted, starving men surged forward, clawing at the troughs for spoonfuls of cold, foul-smelling gruel sloshing within. Fists flew, blood spilled, and friendships shattered in the struggle for survival. Once comrades, who had stood together against the warp's horrors, now fought like feral beasts for scraps. Through the chaos, Sergeant Ellard forced his way forward, ignoring the blows and shouts, until he reached a hunched form seated in the ash. The man was a ruin, his once golden hair now a filthy gray, plastered to a face lost beneath grime and soot. Ellard crouched beside him, offering a meager portion. "Serve food," he said quietly. The man raised his head. Bloodshot eyes peered through a curtain of filth and hair. He gave no reply. "You need to eat, sir." "Why? So I can waste away slower? We're already dying, Ellard." The Mechanicus made sure of that. "Their poisons are already rotting us from the inside." Ellard remained crouched, hands outstretched, still holding the thin sludge. His gaze stayed steady on Lieutenant Colonel Mikhail Leonid. "Because we're the 383rd Jarun Dragoons," he said. "We fight until there's nothing left to fight with." Leonid gave a faint smirk. "Like court-martial," he muttered. "What? Doesn't matter," he said, holding out his hands. Ellard poured the lukewarm fluid into them, its surface shimmering with a greasy film of unknown origin. Leonid sipped the broth, chunks of gristle catching in his throat. The taste was bitter and chemical, the kind of flavor that clung to the back of the mouth. He didn't ask what kind of meat floated in the mix. He already feared the answer. A sharp cramp twisted in his stomach, the same twisting pain that came every day, courtesy of the cancers the Adeptus Mechanicus had embedded in their bloodstream. He clenched his teeth and swallowed hard, letting the fire pass. But Ellard had been right. They were still soldiers. Of Jarun, of the Emperor. They would not break, even if death was already chewing at their bones. Leonid forced the last of the sludge down and wiped his mouth with the back of a shaking hand. In the distance, Obek Sakeo stormed through the forge, his brutal frame rising from the smoke and flame. The whip on his back cracked with electrical fury, lashing a huddled knot of prisoners. His voice roared like thunder. "Up, filth! Back to work! I'll feed your bones to the forge demon myself." Leonid pushed himself upright, limbs aching. It felt like centuries had passed in this nightmare, but he knew it hadn't been long. Time was just another weapon used against them. Only a handful of months had passed since Hydra Cordatus fell beneath the Iron Warrior's siege. Its towering bastions had crumbled, proud spires consumed by flame. The last sight burned into Leonid's memory was of Captain Ashara's mangled warriors lying broken before the Valedictor Gate, their armor torn open like discarded husks. Dragged away in chains, they were packed into prison barges that echoed with misery and blood. The traitor Marines kept them caged and battered through the void, until the hulking vessels descended upon this place of smoke and steel. Whatever corner of the galaxy this was, it felt like a wound in reality itself. Veterans once whispered of nightmare realms, worlds adrift within the Eye of Terror, domains ruled by ancient, unspeakable powers, where madness shaped the laws of existence, planets twisted by gods that defied logic, and where time and form bent to their vile desires. He had once mocked such stories, laughing with others around the fire, though always with unease beneath the grin. Now, surrounded by metal shrines and burning skies, he knew they had spoken truth. The world he now stood on was no myth. It reeked of damnation. Obek Sakeo's immense shadow stretched over him, thrown long by the furnace's infernal glow. "You, slave, stand," came the command, thick with vox distortion. Leonid rose without hesitation. Defying an Iron Warrior meant instant death, and he had no intention of dying here, not by that monster's hand. Zakeo leaned in close, the stench of recycled breath spilling from his helm's rebreather, thick and foul. The yellow gleam of his visor washed over Leonid, casting him in a diseased light, as though the forge itself judged his existence unclean. "Slaves still bring you food. They think you lead them." "I used to," Leonid replied, voice low. "Not anymore." Obek Sakeo gave a rasping laugh, the sound grinding like metal teeth on bone. With thick, clawed fingers, he tugged at the frayed epaulets on Leonid's shoulder, brushing aside ash and oil to expose the worn, tarnished insignia of a lieutenant colonel. "You allowed yourself to be taken alive," Zakeo sneered. "The gods of war will spit on your name forever." "Better scorned than damned," Leonid shot back. "Damn." Zakeo tilted his helm, the word curdling on his lips as if tasting it. "Perhaps, but I am eternal. I am strong. And you, what are you now?" Leonid said nothing. The hatred inside him flared hot, but he held it tight, locking it away behind discipline and fatigue. Pain throbbed through every muscle, a constant drumbeat of weakness and sickness. Yet he stood tall, refusing to break beneath the Chaos Marine's taunts. From the edge of his vision came a flicker of movement, a quick shadow darting between clouds of smoke and the hiss of molten steel. A cry pierced the roar of the forge and the guttural bellow of the bound demon. Zakeo turned, just in time to catch a glancing glimpse of an iron rod arcing toward him. The blow landed with a metallic crunch, staggering the Iron Warrior to one knee. Leonid stumbled backward, barely avoiding the impact. Emaciated slaves surged forward, scrambling across the armored frame of a hauler, dragging masked overseers from the driver's compartment and beating them with jagged or fragments. The demon within the forge shrieked in wild delight, its voice rising with the chaos. Gunfire cracked across the cavernous space, and bodies fell. Blood sprayed in thick arcs, steaming as it splashed onto the searing molds below, the air choking with the stench of scorched flesh and iron. Mutants tried to reverse the remaining haulers, but the uprising had gained momentum. Howling prisoners swarmed the machines, dragging down their tormentors in an explosion of rage fueled by months of suffering. Sergeant Ellard led the charge, sprinting across the broken floor to join the attackers on the nearest hauler. "Turn it toward the gates," he shouted, pointing to the massive entrance of the forge, where twisted servitors now strained to pull the door shut. Leonid allowed a rare smile to crease his face. This could be it. Their chance. Then the pain came. A vicious cramp tore through his stomach, knocking him to the floor. He retched violently, spewing the rancid gruel in heaving waves. His gut spasmed again and again, trying to purge what remained of the poison that had long since begun to rot him from within. A savage frenzy overtook the slaves, their pent-up agony erupting in a storm of violence as they shattered their oppressors with stones, bars, and bare fists. Their faces, caked in soot and grime, were streaked with tears, some of grief, others of rage long denied. Above them, colossal vats of molten metal swung on groaning gantries, glowing like chunks of dying stars in the furnace light. One of the slaves from the Jaran regiment managed to seize the controls of a lumbering trough hauler. The heavy machine shuddered to life, its treads grinding through the ashen floor and belching smoke into the searing air. Cheers erupted as the desperate climbed aboard, clinging to its sides, their cries raw with wild, ragged hope as the vehicle trundled toward the great exit doors and the blinding, toxic sky beyond. Obek Sakeo rose once more, towering and terrible, his mechanical arm raised high. Tubes hissed, barrels aligned, and vents vented steam from his bladed gauntlet. Leonid tried to shout a warning, but his voice failed him, strangled by the pain tearing through his insides. A searing line of fire erupted from the Iron Warrior's weapon, gouts of flame and bolter rounds shredding the side of the hauler. The machine rocked under the impact, blood spraying in arcs as bodies were torn open. Screams echoed like sirens through the cathedral of industry. The forge itself seemed to roar in unison, deafened by death. Obex advanced without pause, dragging Leonid to his feet by the collar to force him to witness the slaughter. Red mist clouded the air as the driver's skull was vaporized, the hauler veering wildly before crashing against a slag heap. The cheers had turned to chaos, as survivors leapt clear or crumpled under the storm of gunfire. Slaves scattered like hunted animals, the last ember of rebellion drowned in blood and fire. Leonid twisted fiercely in Obex Zakeo's grasp, eyes fixed on the massive trough hauler as it barreled into the stanchions, holding the greased rails, supporting the giant molten metal cauldrons. Though slow, the immense weight was enough to tear the stanchions free, crushing them beneath the relentless momentum. The enormous cauldron wobbled precariously, tipping at a torturous pace before plunging off the rails. Scalding molten metal surged out like a torrent of liquid fire, instantly vaporizing flesh, bone, and iron into acrid clouds of steam. Countless slaves were consumed in the inferno, their screams swallowed by the sizzling cascade. The trough hauler itself melted under the heat, disintegrating into bubbling slag that dripped into the ash-laden floor. Golden runes engraved on the forge's surface steamed and flared as rivers of molten metal tore across them, erasing the wards that held the demonic presence captive. The demon's fury swelled with each shattered rune, its anguished roar rising in the furnace's hellish depths. Obex Sakeo abruptly released Leonid and sprinted toward the forge exit, leaving the coughing and choking lieutenant colonel to watch as the molten flood slowed but wrought irreversible destruction. With the final rune dissolved, the demon was unleashed, an ancient warp entity, violent and merciless. A writhing storm of shadowy light and impossible shapes surged forth, twisting reality itself. Those near it tried to scream, but their flesh melted away before sound could escape. Leonid barely dodged as a black tendril slashed across the ground, leaving a sizzling scar in its wake. A writhing, octopus-like shape emerged in the dim light, fueled by the swirling currents of fear and hatred saturating the forge. Black, oily tendrils whipped violently through the air, slicing through men like blades and tossing others high into the smog-choked sky. Skeletal remains collapsed to the floor, drained of life and soul, while Leonid scrambled atop a roaring machine to avoid the creeping tide of molten metal, still deadly hot despite cooling. Across the forge, desperate slaves clawed their way to higher ground, turning on each other with feral savagery to survive. The darkness writhed like a living madness, solidifying into thick, thrashing tentacles that tore through walls and steel girders with deafening screeches. The roof's latticework buckled, collapsing in heavy cascades of twisted metal and debris. Leonid shielded his head as shards and iron sheets rained down, clutching to hope that survival remained possible amid the chaos. Moments stretched agonizingly until silence fell. The demon's screams abruptly ended. Peeking through trembling fingers, Leonid glimpsed the burning white sky beyond a massive rent in the forge's walls. The demon itself was nowhere to be seen, only a patch of shadow flaring faintly against the blinding brightness. The glare seared his eyes, forcing him to turn away. The trough haulers lay in molten heaps, hissing and bubbling. Flames flickered over charred bones and twisted limbs of slaves and mutants trapped in the molten slag. The ceaseless pounding of the forge's engines faded as the demon's power ebbed, pistons and hammers falling silent at last. Leonid surveyed the wreckage left by the demon's rampage, relief washing over him as Sergeant Ellard emerged from behind the shattered remains of a colossal milling machine. Many had perished during the chaotic escape, and those who lived were too stunned to seize the brief opportunity left by the fallen overseers. Time was slipping away fast. Just as Leonid prepared to act, the forge doors burst open with a violent crash. A dozen iron warriors appeared, stark silhouettes against the blinding white sky. Any hope of escape vanished instantly, scattered like ashes on a fierce wind. His gaze fixed on the desolate gray rock platform, where swirling clouds of dust and ash twisted in restless spirals. The agonized cries of fellow prisoners echoed beneath the scorching glare above, burning fiercely down upon them all. Around him, slaves and Durans pressed close, the mingled stench of sweat, blood, and fear saturating the air. Demonic odors slipped from the newly opened tunnel maws, exhaled like the breath of death itself. Leonid trembled at the foul scent invading their cramped space. He risked a glance into the black maw, his mind assaulted by a piercing headache as fragmented visions of colliding realities flickered before him. Clashing blades and ringing bells echoed faintly from the rift's depths. Every fiber of his being vibrated with the disturbing resonance of this tear in existence. Waves of nausea and corruption pulsed outward, spreading from the wound in space-time. A terrible sense of foreboding gripped him, like the tense stillness before a devastating storm. A presence loomed, ancient and unfathomably dark, its malevolence beyond mortal understanding. The crushing weight of that evil pressed on Leonid's mind, but then Obix Zigio stepped between him and the gaping tunnel, shattering the dreadful spell. "You feel it coming, don't you, slave? The Omphalos, a demonium," Obix Zigio sneered. Leonid remained silent, his stomach twisting in pain at the cursed name, wishing bitterly that death had claimed him long before this cursed journey. The failed uprising in the forge had cost the lives of many former comrades. Obix Zigio stalked through the broken remnants of survivors, his brutal fists smashing slaves to death with every savage blow. Captured slaves were torn from hiding, thrown onto whirling lathes, pressed beneath crushing machines, or plunged into boiling vats of molten ore. Limbs were shredded, bones pulverized, and flesh twisted into a grotesque, bleeding ruin. No agony was left unvisited. Every form of torment unleashed in Obix Zigio's merciless punishment. Within moments, hundreds lay dead, butchered to satisfy the traitor's cruel hunger for suffering and domination. Obix Zigio seized Leonid, lifting him off the ground and holding him close to his battered visor. "You are their leader. No, Leonid gasped. I told you I'm not. They still see you as their leader. The Iron Warrior interrupted coldly. Because of that, some of them will die now. Keep your men in order, or I will kill them all. Kill all of them. Not you. Just them. Every last one. Silence, snarled Obik Zigio. Do it. You are useless here now that the demon has fled. You will be taken to the warsmith, Hansu, and put to work in his weapon shops. The warning was clear. Any attempt to flee would be met with far harsher punishment. Beyond the machines and the shattered forge, the slaves were herded into a tangled maze of fortifications. Barbed wire stretched endlessly, connecting fortified bunkers and pillboxes armed with oversized artillery that seemed both impossible and deadly. The constant thrum of distant cannon fire echoed through the air, but the identities of the combatants and the reasons for the battle remained a grim mystery. Many slaves fell along the way, succumbing to exhaustion, starvation, or the brutal violence dealt out by Obek Sakao's cruel hand. The brutal march dragged on for countless days, though time itself was distorted in a place where the sun never set and the sky never darkened. Each step revealed fresh horrors. Roads lined with mutilated bodies, human, alien, and grotesque forms beyond recognition. Skulls stacked like grim towers, fields of pulsating flesh, and towering monuments built from shattered bones marked the path forward. Leonid watched as the weary column advanced toward jagged, smoke-streaked mountains, their peaks swallowed by blinding light and dark, swirling clouds. Thick pillars of swirling, sentient smoke rose from the blood-soaked plains surrounding the mountains, drawn by some unspoken force to hide the horrors and dark secrets that awaited in the shadows above. No matter the path they took, the foreboding sinister mountains loomed ever closer, a grim beacon marking the end of their journey. Leonid's heart sank with the brutal truth. None among them would live to see the peaks of those cursed heights. Each glimpse of the barren, twisted summits stirred a mix of morbid fascination and deep revulsion within him, a dreadful promise of what lay ahead. The fortress known as Hydra Cordatus stood as a masterpiece of military design, forged by an unknown architect's genius. Yet, against the colossal, nightmarish fortifications sprawling across this world, it seemed but a minor relic, an insignificant echo beneath the crushing weight of these monstrous defenses. At last, the forced march halted before a towering gate of twisted bronze and barbed iron, opening into a vast rectangular expanse stretching nearly a kilometer wide and twice as long. From somewhere nearby came anguished screams, agonized howls that tore through the air like shards of glass, stabbing at Leonid's mind. Beneath his feet, the earth was unnervingly soft, crimson liquid seeping upward as if the ground itself was bleeding. Upon closer inspection, the soil revealed a grim mosaic of shattered bones and grinning skulls, their pale forms stark against the dark red mud. Horrified, Leonid pondered the sheer number who must have been drained of blood to soak such an immense ground. How many lives had been sacrificed, arteries emptied, to quench this cursed land's insatiable thirst? Nausea twisted his insides, but with nothing left to vomit, he fought to hold back the rising bile as the foul stench of fresh blood overwhelmed his senses. Sergeant Ellard steadied him as they crossed a dense expanse of timber planks, leading toward the heart of this grim arena, an unforgiving killing ground. Doubts gnawed at Leonid's mind. Was this the place of their execution? Had they been brought here to add their blood to the countless others already spilled upon this cursed earth? Refusing to rely on Ellard's support any longer, Leonid pushed himself upright, determined to face whatever awaited on his own. Approaching the center, a long strip of rockcrete stretched across the blood-stained soil, its surface scarred by rusted, gore-smeared rails running end to end, anchored at the arena's stone walls. Climbing the steps onto the rockcrete platform, the source of the haunting screams became chillingly clear. Between the rails lay sleepers, twisted heaps of flesh and bone, grotesquely fused by dark magic. Their torment echoed through maniacal wails, voices overlapping like a chorus of maddened banshees, caught in eternal agony. Eyes and mouths churned within the viscous mass of each sleeper, their endless suffering giving ghastly expression before their forms dissolved, replaced by another soul's unending purgatory. Overcome, Many slaves dropped to their knees, overwhelmed by the raw horror, their fraying sanity buckling beneath such vile torment. Obexakeo showed no mercy, violently throwing the writhing figures from the platform. They crashed into the ground with splatters of blood, but the horror deepened as skeletal, fleshless hands burst from the dark soil, grasping and dragging the fallen back beneath the surface to an unknown, dreadful fate below. Leonid fought to block out the gurgling, drowning screams of those consumed by the bleeding earth. Shutting his eyes, he glimpsed shards of fractured realities, clashing echoes and shimmering crystals, detaching from one plane and shifting into another, resonating at a frequency that twisted his very perception. Ripples of time bent and shifted the boundaries between realities, folding dimensions into one another like dancers weaving through an endless ballet of possibilities. A sharp cry tore through the air as Leonid's eyes snapped open, dizzy and disoriented from the shifting visions. Grasping Sergeant Ellard for support, he whispered hoarsely, "Sir, Emperor's blood." Around the death arena, a deep tremor vibrated through the earth. Jagged bone stumps sank back beneath the blood-soaked soil, while the sleepers' agonized screams rose louder, echoing with fresh torment. Where the rails vanished into the courtyard walls, shimmering ribbons of multicolored energy seeped from cracks in the stone, twisting the air like a warped mirror. The solid walls stretched and warped, pulled into a dark vortex that swallowed the courtyard whole, leaving only a flickering curtain of void, haunted by countless screaming faces. Realms twisted and overlapped, past and future converging on the bloodstained rails, an endless journey with no beginning and no end. From this chaotic nothingness, the Omphilus Demonium emerged, a nightmarish horror birthed from the dark abyss, leaving devastation and ruin in its wake. Obix Zakayu laughed coldly, though fear flickered beneath his harsh exterior. The demon approached, its full, terrible power far greater than the screams of flesh and fire that had warned of its presence. It thundered from the tunnel like a wrathful juggernaut of apocalypse, shrieking down the iron rails toward the paralyzed slaves. Some tried to flee but were crushed instantly. Others dropped dead from terror or curled into helpless fetal shapes, trembling and soiling themselves like infants. Leonid fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the monstrous demon engine's terrible and unstoppable advance. Obex Sakeo gave a solemn nod, acknowledging the dark majesty before him. Massive pistons of bone and steel throbbed relentlessly, pushing the monstrous engine forward. Its iron sides glistened with strange, unearthly energies, while blood leaked from rivets shaped like twisted skulls. Beneath, grinding wheels crushed the earth itself, devouring the gore that soaked the ground. At its core, the towering machine once resembled a steam locomotive of a forgotten age, but arcane forces and chaotic powers had warped it beyond recognition. The sound of its approach was more than mere noise. It resonated across dimensions unseen by mortal senses, shaking the very fabric of reality within the eye of terror. Such abominations were no longer rare. They moved as if normal. Behind the main engine lumbered a dark iron tender and a chain of creaking boxcars. Their wooden planks were stained deep with blood and ancient rot. Leonid sensed the countless souls trapped within, doomed to endure unspeakable torment, carried to foul destinations where extermination awaited. The monstrous construct, known as the Omphilus Demonium, began to slow. Silence stretched painfully as it halted beside the platform. A wave of vile power washed over Leonid, forcing tears of blood from his eyes and wrenching his body with uncontrollable agony. His bowels betrayed him, overwhelmed by the sheer malice radiating from the infernal engine. From somewhere deep within, thunderous laughter echoed, twisted and cruel. The screeching of rusted iron doors dragged open pierced the air. Leonid turned on his back, watching thick clouds of blood-tinged steam hiss violently from the armored plates of the demonic colossus. The steaming tendrils of dark vapor writhed with sinister purpose. The laughter seemed to ride those curling mists as they slithered like living things. Gradually, the tendrils grew denser, more corporeal, winding through the masses of chained slaves crowding the platform. One tendril coiled tightly around a sobbing man, crushing him like a serpent's embrace. Swiftly, others lashed out, tearing at flesh and bone in a merciless frenzy. The victims were consumed utterly, No trace remained but the echo of their screams, swallowed by the infernal haze. Lynn's eyes flickered open, frozen in dread as the smoke tendrils dissipated, revealing 8 figures where nothing had stood before. Clad in seamless gray boiler suits and sturdy boots fastened with silver buckles, they moved with an eerie precision. Their garb concealed nothing of the horror beneath. Each figure was armed with a brutal assortment of blades, hooks, and serrated saws, hanging from belts engineered for slaughter. Their faces bore only a faint human outline, stripped of skin. Muscles gleamed wet and raw beneath. Jagged stitches scarred their skulls as they twisted their heads with unnatural motions, tracking prey by scent alone. Their eyes, noses, and ears were replaced by grotesque tumors, blackened, swollen masses pulsing beneath the stretched flesh of their skulls. These abominations drifted among the enslaved crowd, seizing men at random. Spines snapped with savage ease as razor teeth clamped onto the cancerous growths festering on their victims' necks. A piercing wave of agony filled the air as the creatures fed, sucking on the malignant sores that festered and spread throughout the bodies of the Yaroon slaves. Lynn pressed his hands against his ears, desperate to block the dreadful sound. One fiend passed close, and a choking terror welled inside him, deeper than any fear he had known. Its patchwork face swung slowly toward him, swollen tumors pulsing with ravenous hunger. Blackened fingers, cold and putrid, grabbed his ragged uniform, yanking him upright with relentless force. The touch was like decayed flesh crawling with maggots and molten larvae, a sickening promise of death. The creature's face hovered inches from his, breath reeking of decay and burnt corpses. Its distorted lips moved across his skin, tasting, searching for a trace of life, savoring his scent with a grotesque hunger. The unnatural silence was broken only by the faint hiss of its breath. "Favored by the Sarcomata," whispered Obek Sakeo, voice heavy with dread, flesh corrupted, made manifest and hungry. The spreading malignancy consumed his body, a delicacy to these horrors. Lynn waited, trembling, for the end. Yet the demon engine had a crueler fate in store. With a furious roar, the Omphalos demonium demanded obedience. The creature's slavering maw descended upon the swollen tumors on Lynn's neck. Submission hissed from its throat before it flung him through the creaking doors of the boxcar behind the infernal engine. He landed amid a foul bed of decay, soaked in blood and excrement, swallowed by darkness and despair. Their grotesque hunger momentarily sated, the Sacramenta herded the remaining slaves with ruthless efficiency. The captives were driven into the boxcars, crammed so tightly that movement became impossible. Once sealed inside, only the oppressive darkness and their mounting fear remained as companions. "Where do you think they're taking us?" Illard whispered, voice trembling with uncertainty. "I don't know," Sergeant Leonid answered, "but I heard Obaxakea mention a name. Hansu, I believe." The name lingered in the stale air, heavy with ominous meaning. "I've heard that name before," Illard murmured. "Where?" Leonid's voice dropped. "On the prison hulks that brought us here. It might be the name of their leader on Hydrocordatus." A cold shiver crawled down Leonid's spine at the memory of the Iron Warrior's commander standing grim before the Citadel's walls. Captain Ashera had once called that warrior a cursed rune-bearer, and the sick dread that had settled in Leonid's gut resurfaced now. If this monstrous figure truly awaited them, perhaps the cruel fate at the hands of the Sacramenta was a lesser evil than what lay ahead in this forsaken place. Nearly 100 men were forced into a boxcar built for half their number. The suffocating stench of sweat, blood, and fear assaulted every sense. Bodies pressed so close together that even the smallest movement was impossible, each man locked in a suffocating human cage. Sobs and cries echoed softly as slivers of harsh sunlight pierced the warped wooden slats, flickering inside the darkness. The infernal engine clattered relentlessly, its noise rising and falling as it climbed into the mountainous terrain. The air tasted faintly of smoke and charged electricity, reminiscent of the eerie atmosphere within the machine temple of the Citadel. Leonid pressed his face against a narrow crack of light, gazing out at the bright day beyond. Ash-covered rocks blurred past, as green sparks flew from the soul wheels propelling the Omphalos demonium upward. Above, thick clouds rolled closer, breaking now and then to reveal jagged spires, blade-like fortresses, and redoubts bristling with gun barrels. The demon engine began to veer into a wide, deliberate arc. As it turned, the terrain outside shifted to reveal an impossible bridge, an architectural madness suspended over a chasm so vast it defied reason. Thousands of rusted girders and contorted beams crisscrossed into a skeletal lattice, impossibly holding together above an abyss of infinite depth. Beneath the bridge, no ground could be seen, only churning fog, streaked with violet lightning. Shapes moved within the mist, shrieking, winged predators circling the currents. The screeching echoed up through the bones of the engine, shaking the carriages as it pressed forward across the unholy span. "We need to escape," hissed Leonid, his voice low, urgent. "Believe me, I know," muttered Allard. "But how? We've got nothing. We stay on this train, we die," Leonid replied grimly. "So what's the alternative?" "Most of the ones who could have fought are dead," Allard said, voice raw. "The Forge Temple killed them all. We don't have numbers, or weapons, or even space to move." "You think I haven't noticed?" snapped Leonid. "But we die here, or we die fighting. Choose." Allard exhaled heavily and rested the back of his head against the metal wall of the boxcar, staring out at the jagged terrain beyond the tracks. His face was pale, hollow-eyed, ringed with lines carved from exhaustion. His once indomitable strength seemed drained to nothing. Leonid had depended on his sergeants for everything, especially men like Allard, iron-hearted, battle-forged, unshakable. But now, even he looked hollow, worn down to the marrow. To see that flame dimmed was a blow more crushing than the engine's steel. A creeping weariness overtook Leonid. The relentless motion, the stink of blood and oil, and the tension stretched too thin. His limbs sagged, and his eyes fluttered shut. Somewhere distantly came a sound, sharp, brief cracks, muffled but unmistakable. "Gunfire! Down, sir!" barked Allard, suddenly reanimated. He lunged, dragging Leonid toward the floor. Bodies pressed in from all sides, but Allard's brute force carved a path through them. Despite his failing strength, he shoved Leonid down into the filth-slick floorboards. "What are you?" Leonid began, but the words died as the wall behind him erupted. The timber exploded inward with the force of a battering ram. Fist-sized holes burst through the sides of the boxcar as high-velocity projectiles punched through, carving bloody trails through the densely packed prisoners. Shafts of daylight pierced the dark, broken only by sprays of red. Leonid rolled, shielding his head. Screams rose on every side as men collapsed, shredded by gunfire. Splinters and flesh filled the air. Somewhere outside, something fired again, and the metal beast groaned, refusing to stop, dragging its slaughtered cargo deeper into the mountains. Chaos consumed the interior of the boxcar. Blood sprayed across the warped timbers as screaming men convulsed under a hail of gunfire. The air grew thick with the metallic stench of blood and the acrid haze of gunpowder. Corpses slumped where they stood, propped upright only by the crushing press of the living. Rivulets of blood pooled on the floor, seeping toward the doors, flowing out in sticky streams. Above the slaughter, a deafening impact thundered across the roof. Metal shrieked, twisted, and tore, and then something massive struck again, shearing through the top of the car like it were parchment. From the gash above, a figure emerged, towering, armored, and terrible. Framed by the pale blaze of the sky, a warrior clad in night-black power armor loomed into view. Ceramite plates gleamed with battle wear, and his eyes flared behind a helmet shaped for war. "Slaves, rise! Fight the Iron Warriors!" the figure roared, voice amplified by the helm's vox. His words rang like thunder, awakening a buried defiance. Leonid staggered upright, heart hammering, limbs brimming with a fresh surge of desperate resolve. Deliverance had come. The armored giant turned his gaze toward the engine, eyes tracking the length of the train. "Move quickly," he shouted. "The Sacramento will descend upon us." His voice carried the weight of command, forged in fire and blood. Leonid laughed, the sound wild with elation and release. Grabbing at shattered beams and bullet-scarred planks, he began climbing toward the light. The bullet holes now served as handholds, leading upward to hope. He pushed his head through the ragged gap in the roof, and for the first time in days, wind rushed over his skin. It lashed against his face and through his hair, stinging his eyes with dust and blood. He pulled himself through the torn opening, gasping, then turned to reach back down. Allard was climbing after him, and Leonid gripped his wrist, hauling him toward the breach in the sky. Above them, the heavens blazed white with unnatural brilliance. The black sun hung in the sky, bleeding greasy, serpentine tendrils of shadow toward a far-off range of sawtooth mountains. Leonid tore his gaze from the vision before it could consume him with madness. The Space Marine's claws withdrew into armored gauntlets, retracting with a hiss of pressure and light. Leonid studied the warriors form more closely. This was no shining champion from the pages of Imperial legend. His armor was battered and worn, marred by gouges and shrapnel scars. Crude welds and riveted patches marked countless field repairs. Boiling vapors hissed from the ports of a colossal jump pack strapped to his back, its turbines spitting fire. Painted across one pauldron was the ghost of a bird of prey insignia, now defaced by a crude crimson cross. This was not a warrior of parade grounds and honor duels. This was a killer shaped by horror, a relic of vengeance reborn in rusted steel and spite. Whatever loyalty he once bore had long since been drowned in blood and silence, and now he had returned to strike back at the Iron Warriors. A harsh crimson sigil had been scorched across the warrior's visor, the same jagged symbol painted crudely atop faded heraldry. Along the line of the infernal train, more power-armored giants emerged, each one clad in mismatched plate, a riot of colors, generations of war gear repurposed. Their pauldrons bore relics of lost brotherhoods, chapter insignia scoured, overpainted, or left intact like scars. These warriors moved with brutal purpose, tearing open rusted boxcar doors, dragging slaves from the foul interiors, and directing them toward the rear of the engine. But when Leonid looked back into the pit from which he had climbed, only he and Allard had answered the call to rise. The rest, perhaps 40 souls, remained trapped below, frozen in fear, gazing up with hollow eyes. A roar of wind forced Leonid to raise his voice. "Who are you?" he shouted, fighting to be heard above the howling air. "Adi Ragvans," the warrior bellowed in return, his voice a metallic thunder. "Of the Red Corsairs." As he spoke, he drew a sidearm, heavy, blocky, and cold with death. "Behind me!" the Red Corsair barked, taking position. Leonid and Allard crawled across the trembling roof, clinging to the dented metal as the train rattled over a void of unspeakable depth. The wind burned their faces, and below them lay only mist and madness. The demon engine screamed forward, its sole wheels screeching against cursed tracks. Leonid glanced up just in time to see a monstrous figure vaulting onto the roof behind them. Obexakeo had come, his whip already arcing above his horned helm, the weapon alive with a storm of writhing energy. "Look out!" Leonid shouted. The lash cracked, blue lightning bursting across the sky. The whip coiled around Van's armored forearm, discharging a thunderous wave of electricity. The Space Marine growled, refusing to fall, though his pistol slipped from his hand and skidded across the roof toward the abyss. He staggered back, locked in pain, armor sparking from the force of the strike. "Go!" Vans barked, his gaze snapping toward Leonid and Allard. "Make for the front. Stop the engine before it reaches the gatehouse." Without hesitation, the two scrambled forward, creeping over the bladed prow of the next car as the battle raged behind them. Obex advanced, massive footfalls booming across the rooftop. His servo claw opened with a shriek of gears, reaching for Van's throat. The Red Corsair launched a desperate counterattack, lightning-charged blades carving an arc. But Obex met the strike with a savage parry, his axe sweeping aside the blow like a curtain of smoke. The Iron Warrior seized Vans by the gorget, his claw clamping tight. "Who are you to steal the offerings of Warsmith Hanso?" Obex snarled, voice full of venom. Renegades die screaming. The claw closed, servos whining. The armor around Van's neck groaned, hairline fractures forming with a hideous crack. Over the shriek of metal, sunlight flashed off the edge of the boxcar. There, teetering on the brink, lay the fallen pistol. Its matte barrel gleamed faintly in the light as the winds howled across the bridge and the two warriors struggled at the edge of death. Leonid reached out across the vibrating rooftop, his fingers wrapping around the grip of the massive pistol. It was a weapon built for transhuman hands, its frame bulky and unbalanced in his own. Muscle strained under the weight as he turned onto his back, bracing the sidearm against his chest, one arm locked beneath it for support. He squeezed the trigger. The recoil was monstrous, tearing the gun from his hands as the report echoed like thunder between the peaks. The weapon skidded, nearly sliding over the edge, but he lunged forward and caught the heavy grip before it vanished into the abyss. His ears rang, but the impact had found its mark. The round struck Obex Zakaeo's helm with a shattering force, sending the Iron Warrior spinning. The crushing claw that had been throttling Adirag Vans released, and the Space Marine exploded into motion, surging upright with a feral snarl. "Move!" Vans roared, his gauntlet thrusting toward the front of the train. "You have to stop it before the gatehouse." Through the smoke-choked wind and choking fumes, the tracks ahead emerged from the fog like a vision of hell. There, set into the mountainside, stood a fortress forged of black stone and heretical geometry. Its towers pierced the skies like rusted daggers, each spire laced with warp-borne metal that shimmered with sickening hues. The gateway yawned open like a predator's mouth, swallowing the rails into a blackened throat. Steam and fire belched from furnaces buried in its walls, and chains as thick as warships hung from the parapets. Lights flickered behind gun ports and cyclopean battlements, and the very air around it seemed to groan with a timeless hunger. Thunderous hammering resounded from within, the song of ancient machines kept alive by demon hearts and the agony of mortals. Between the towers, massive cranes rotated and engines shrieked. This was not merely a fortification. It was a sanctum of industry, war, and madness. And it was merely the gatehouse. Illard's voice trembled. "Throne of Terra," he breathed. Leonid nodded grimly, unable to deny the awe and dread that gripped them. There was no choice now but forward. Behind them, the shriek of metal against metal and the clash of energized blades signaled the ongoing duel atop the train. Ahead loomed a nightmare carved from obsidian and blasphemy. With no time to waste, they crawled on, dragging themselves across the steel plating, feeling each vibration of the soul engine beneath. As they neared the front, a foul pressure pressed against them, an unseen force radiating from the heart of the Omphalos demonium. Their noses bled, ears trickling crimson. Every breath tasted of rust, decay, and the graves of ancient stars. Each meter forward was a crawl through pain. The train shrieked in defiance as it neared the final stretch of tracks, heading straight into the gaping wound in the mountainside. What waited within would not be mercy or salvation, only the forge of damnation. Leonid rose unsteadily to his feet, the shrieking wind biting against his skin as he prepared to board the demon engine. Between the locomotive and the trailing boxcars, a grotesque tender swayed, an open vat of horror brimming with mangled corpses. Blood mist coiled in the air like red ribbons, issuing from vents where the sacrament fed. Chunks of flesh steamed on rusted grills, and spectral limbs twitched in the engine's turbulent wake. "We need to move now," barked Allard. Leonid gave a short nod, suppressing the bile in his throat. Without hesitation, he leapt into the writhing gore. He crashed into the mess with a sickening squelch, knees sinking into a mire of torn limbs and gelatinous fluids. Bodies ruptured beneath him, and slippery entrails coiled around his boots. The floor shifted with the tender's motion, jostling them like refuse in a slaughter pit. Illard dropped him beside him and gripped his arm, hauling him upright. They trudged forward, each step disturbing pockets of decay that burst with gas and clotted mist. The air was thick with rot, every breath laced with iron and death. The red vapor encircling them moved with unnatural purpose, not drifting, but slithering, tendrils of coagulated smoke that flexed like muscle. "Emperor, forgive us," muttered Allard, as his foot dislodged a pale, eyeless head from the mass of remains. Reaching the edge of the tender, Leonid latched onto the engine's rear platform and hoisted himself up. He cast a wary glance at the smoke's movement before extending a hand back for his sergeant. Illard climbed, struggling as the vapor thickened and took shape. A face emerged from the mist, skinless, eyeless, its skull formed of twitching meat and bone. Fangs gnashed silently in a lipless maw as spindly arms reached from the fog. "Faster!" Leonid shouted, abandoning his grip on the stolen pistol to grasp Allard's collar. The wraith's grip tightened around the sergeant, pulling with sinewy force. Though it lacked full form, the demon had terrible strength. Leonid clenched his jaw and yanked, summoning one last surge of energy to free Allard from the ghost's embrace. They fell together onto the metal platform of the Omphalostemonium, slamming hard against the iron floor. A tarnished brass door shuttered behind them, locked and without handle. Smoke poured through its grill, bringing with it the stench of charred meat and molten flesh. More shapes rose from the corpse vat below, malformed and growing solid. Their shrieks rasped like steam escaping from cracked pipes, and their hunger was palpable. Leonid turned, gripping the serrated deck, and reached for the fallen weapon. A blur of claws surged forward. One of the demons lunged, its arms hooked like butcher's tools. Leonid squeezed the trigger. The shot thundered, splitting the beast's skull in a fan of gore. Its corpse splattered against the bronze door with a screech. Where the demonic blood touched, the metal quivered and hissed. It sizzled and evaporated instantly, leaving runic scars in the door's surface. Behind them, the others gathered, their hunger rising, their limbs half-shaped from fire and shadow. Leonid stood firm, pistol in hand, breath shallow and ragged. Allard found his footing, lifting a bent pipe as a makeshift weapon. The brass door groaned as if reacting to the blood, and from deep within the engine's haunted interior, something ancient stirred. The iron-bound doorway shivered, its surface writhing like hot metal under pressure. As Leonid's weight collapsed against it, the portal gave way with a sudden hiss, swinging inward without resistance. He fell forward into a furnace-like chamber, seared by waves of intense heat. Allard followed instantly, slamming the warped door shut behind them with all his strength. Behind the sealed threshold, the shrieking Succumata slammed their bodies into the barrier. The sound of their claws tearing at the metal was relentless, driven by starvation and blind rage. Their hunger lingered in the air like a presence, pressing down with unnatural force, as if their need to devour could reach through the steel. Leonid stumbled upright, his breath ragged and burning in his lungs. Before him sprawled the heart of the demon engine, an interior that mocked logic and space. The chamber extended impossibly in every direction, a seething, furnace-lit cavern filled with choking red haze and groaning chains. The heat was unbearable, the walls alive with the sound of boiling flesh and groaning pistons. The space was vaster than any forge on Obexikeo's mountain, a mechanical cathedral built from madness and ruin. In its center loomed a towering figure clad in industrialized power armor, riveted and layered in hardened rubber and steel plates. A soot-stained apron of dried gore hung from its chest, and jagged metal horns crowned a helmet shaped like a furnace bell. Its visor was raised, revealing only shadows beneath. A constant murmur of profane rhymes and grinding invocations escaped the figure's hidden face as it moved between racks of flesh. Rows of limbless torsos swayed gently from rusted chains, pierced through by meat hooks, twitching with dying nerves. The figure seized one headless cadaver with a hooked pole and swung it into a yawning furnace mouth. Fire consumed the offering with a roar, and a gout of black smoke erupted from the vents above. Engines roared to life, fueled not by oil or promethium, but by flesh rendered into ash and soul. "There," the figure rasped, its voice as corroded as the chamber. "Incantations are vanity. Words are air. Flesh is truth. Flesh is power. Flesh binds the demon." The ritual continued with mechanical certainty. Each corpse fed into the inferno, bringing the demon engine more strength. The door behind them groaned under fresh assault. Leonid turned, eyes scanning for a path forward, hand tightening on the pistol. The heat blurred his vision, but the shape before him was unmistakable, a giant, armed with a cleaver the size of a man, now facing them fully. "So," said the brute, stepping forward with a butcher's grace. "The sacral spirits whisper, and meat walks willingly into my fire. You've brought better gifts than the withered leavings I'm forced to burn." The weapon in his hand swung slowly from side to side, tracing arcs through the smoke. "What are you?" Leonid demanded, voice taut with fury and fear. The giant tilted its head and replied in a chant-like growl. "I's the Slaughterman, Iron Warrior born, cutter of sinew, breaker of bone, flesh for the gears, blood for the wheels, flame for the soul machine." Sparks flared from beneath his boots as he advanced, each word pounding like a ritual drumbeat in the engine's throat. The air grew thicker with every step. Metal groaned and pistons slammed in rhythm. The demon engine was awakening, and the Slaughterman, priest of its hunger, stood ready to make the offering. The furnace roared behind the monstrous figure, tongues of flame licking across his armored back in vain, slashing out like the claws of some imprisoned beast. Heat shimmered off his metal plates, and the reek of burning marrow filled the air. A graveled laugh rolled from deep within the giant's chest, thick with menace, as he turned slightly to glance into the inferno. "No, not today, demon," he barked, mocking the machine spirit. "You'll not feast on my bones just yet. Rage all you want. I bring the flesh. You swallow the dead." His amusement was sickening, a grotesque sound that crawled over the nerves. "This thing runs on corpses," Allard muttered, the horror in his voice plain. His eyes scanned the chains and bodies, swinging like pendulums above the flames. "You're feeding it meat." "Of course," said the butcher priest, gesturing to the hooks beside him. "Meat feeds the flame. Blood oils the gears. And fresh offerings." He tilted his head toward them. "Well, fresh offerings are for me." He stepped forward with slow, deliberate purpose. "I'll carve you clean. Strip the muscle neat. Dress the cuts with praise, and drink what spills." His gauntlet, crusted in dried gore, opened an invitation. "Now come. Be still. Make it easier for the knife." Leonid lifted the bolt pistol, his hand steady despite the sweltering heat. "Stop this engine," he said coldly, "and I'll let you walk away." The Slaughterman grinned beneath his horned helm, shaking his head as if amused by a child's joke. "You don't make terms with meat," he growled. "You season it. You slice it. You hush it when it screams." The shot rang out, loud and sharp. The bolt smashed into the butcher's chest plate, detonating on impact. A splatter of oily fluid and half-rendered tissue leaked through the torn apron. The Iron Warrior staggered, snarling, face twisted in shock and rage. "You dare," he roared. "You shoot I's the Slaughterman." He raised his blade, each word heavier than the last. "I will butcher you slowly, piece by piece. You'll taste your own marrow before I'm done." Leonid fired again. This time the Slaughterman deflected the shot with his hook cleaver, the blade whirling through the air with unnatural strength. He lunged forward, the weapon sweeping down in a killing arc meant to split a man from skull to spine. Leonid threw himself aside, the edge scraping fire from the iron deck where he'd stood a heartbeat before. Sparks burst around him. He rolled, came up crouching, and fired. The bolt missed, slamming into a hanging corpse. It exploded from within, a wet burst of offal spraying the floor. Behind the berserker, Allard darted between the smoke-wreathed chains, searching for anything to fight with. The Slaughterman advanced again, bellowing fury, his blade crashing into the meat racks around him. Leonid ducked beneath another swing and fired once more, blowing down another swaying cadaver. The burst of fire shredded limbs and torsos. Chains snapped loose, and heavy bodies dropped with splashes of gore. "No," the Iron Warrior screamed. "Not the dead flesh. That is sacred. Bad flesh must be dealt with, chopped and fed." In his frenzy, the butcher turned from Leonid, slashing at the falling corpses as if to save them. Leonid stepped back, unloading the pistol into the racks of meat. Bolts detonated in rapid succession, turning the butcher's sanctum into a charnel storm of ruined bodies and shrieking metal. Hooks snapped. Chains fell. The firebox choked on blood and bone, and the slaughterman's howls of rage filled the belly of the demon engine. The butcher's howls turned into inhuman bellows, a mad symphony of rage and slaughter as he rampaged forward. The billhook tore through swinging carcasses with ferocious ease, each arc of the blade hurling blood and sinew through the air. Leonid fired again and again, bolts thundering into the haze, until the pistol clicked on an empty chamber. The smoke curled tighter, and severed limbs swung like pendulums from the racks above. One chain slipped loose, clattering to the deck in a heap of blood-slick iron. The final body fell away, and the hulking warrior emerged from the ruin. Across the engine room, Illard stood still and silent beside the control lever, hand poised near the mechanism that governed the overhead chains. Steam hissed, flame snarled behind the butcher, and the engine pulsed like a breathing beast. The slaughterman advanced, stepping over the dismembered remains with unbothered calm. Leonid seized the fallen hook, gripping it tight, its edge glistening with old gore. He held it out in trembling defiance. The butcher paused, voice rumbling low. "You're not even good meat. Tainted. Unworthy. No honor in the slicing." He leaned close, helm tilting forward, and at last the visor caught the light. Beneath the horned crown, the face was slack and bloated, the skin hanging loose over a skull too large, too round. His grin was split by rotten teeth, and the eyes were vast voids of idiocy and malice, empty of comprehension but full of intent. A monster shaped by butchery and madness. With no warning, the slaughterman lunged, one gauntlet snapping out to grip Leonid's chest. The impact lifted him from the floor like a broken doll. Pain flared through his ribs as the iron grip tightened. "You're nothing," the butcher hissed. "Not even worth the blade. I'll chew you down to bones." The mouth opened, a grotesque cavern of filth and decay. Skin tore at the corners as the jaws widened far beyond human limits. A wet crack signaled the unhinging of a jaw meant for tearing, not speech. The breath that poured forth was foul beyond reason, thick with the stench of rot, bile, and corrupted flesh. Leonid thrashed, slamming his boots into the plated gut of the Iron Warrior. The armored belly did not yield, but the force made the monster stumble half a step back. The flames behind him flared, casting the slaughterman's shadow across the rusted wall like a demonic titan. Still he held his prey aloft, jaws descending slowly, saliva stringing from sharpened teeth. As the butcher's fanged maw descended, Leonid drove the hook upward with every ounce of strength he had left. The jagged point tore through hardened flesh and splintered bone, crunching into the slaughterman's jaw and bursting upward through the eye socket. A spray of gore followed, thick and black, sizzling as it hit the furnace-heated metal. The massive Iron Warrior reeled, his howl a shriek of agony that echoed from every riveted wall. Leonid dropped from his grip, landing hard on the blood-slicked deck. The butcher clawed at the embedded hook, but the chain snapped taut with a violent lurch. Ellard had seized the winch and was reeling it in with desperate fury. The chain screeched along the rusted pulleys, grinding against old iron as the wounded butcher was dragged back step by step. His great hands tore at the chain, seeking slack, but Ellard gave him none. The whirring mechanism groaned under the strain as it hauled the Iron Warrior ever closer to the seething firebox. The demon engine sensed what approached. Flames burst outward in anticipation, curling like claws hungry for retribution. The slaughterman screamed and fought, digging his heels into the deck, but the blood-slick surface offered no purchase. He bellowed curses as the heat enveloped him, boiling the air around his armor. Infernal fire surged out in a final eruption, enveloping the struggling giant in flame. A wailing screech rose from the firebox, not entirely human, not entirely machine. The demonic furnace claimed its tormentor, pulling him into its core with greedy, roaring force. The chained hook vanished into the blaze. The door slammed shut behind him with a thunderous clang, silencing his cries forever. A tremor passed through the deck as the engine groaned inside. Bone pistons slowed, gears unclenched, and steam hissed from every valve. The angry glow faded from the walls as the air cooled, and the madness in the chamber began to subside. The impossible geometry of the engine room began to realign, the twisted architecture settling into something that obeyed the laws of nature once more. Leonid collapsed onto the floor, breath shallow and ragged, hands shaking. The horrors etched into his mind threatened to break through his resolve. Ellard stumbled toward him, armor-stained and steaming, and extended a gloved hand. "We did it. Saints above, we actually did it." Leonid grasped his arm and pulled himself upright. "Yes, Sergeant. He's gone, burned in the fire he fed." They both turned toward the furnace, still listening for any return of the butcher's voice. Silence answered them. No grinding of gears, no screams, no laughter. Just the sound of cooling metal and their own breath. "Is it stopping?" Ellard asked, voice uncertain. Leonid looked to the door from which they had entered, its surface now dull and quiet. "It feels like it is." The pounding footsteps of the Psychomata had ceased entirely. An eerie silence settled over the furnace chamber, as though their presence had unraveled along with the death of the beast in the firebox. Whether their existence had been tied to the slaughterman or the demon itself, none could say for certain. But whatever held them here had lost its grip. Before that thought could fully take shape, the bronze door blew inward in a shriek of twisted metal. A halo of harsh white daylight framed the silhouette that stepped through. Artarak stood tall, his armor streaked with soot, his expression unreadable. "You actually did it," he said, as if he hadn't expected them to survive. Leonid nodded, limping toward him through the cooling steam. "Yes, it's over." Van narrowed his gaze. "Obak Zakeo, did you kill him?" "No, but he's gone now, vanished with the rest of the train." Leonid looked past the threshold and frowned at the sight that awaited them outside. Where once had been the endless string of boxcars, now only the tender remained. The chain couplings had been torn away, and the Omphalos Demonium shuddered quietly in place. A handful of battered Astartes stood within it, watching the horizon with grim determination. The cars, and everyone in them, had vanished. Leonid's voice rose with disbelief. "What did you do? You said you came for us." His fury echoed along the broken tracks. Artarak Van's response was calm, almost dispassionate. "We never came to rescue anyone. Our mission was simple: prevent the Iron Warriors from acquiring more labor for their forges." Ellard stepped forward, gazing down the line, still searching for the vanished boxcars. "You destroyed them," he said quietly. "Those were our brothers." Van's expression hardened. If they knew the fate that awaited them within Hanso's citadel, they would have begged for death. Leonid clenched his fists. "You bastard. I fought beside them. They were soldiers, my men." Van met his anger with solemnity. "They weren't your men anymore. They were broken, hollowed. You know that. But you're not. There's still fire in your blood." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You can come with us. Fight back. Make this right. But choose now. The gatehouse looms, and the sentries will not delay long." With that, Van climbed into the tender and raised his gauntlet over the coupling's release, waiting. Leonid hesitated. "We don't even know what you are." Van looked back. "We were once Astartes, sons of the Imperium, loyal to the Emperor. But now, our loyalty is to each other alone. Your kind would call us renegades, but today, we are the only allies you have." Leonid opened his mouth to speak, but felt Ellard's hand on his shoulder. The sergeant's grip was firm. "Sir, he may be right." Leonid turned to him, eyes burning. "He killed our men, Ellard." "I know, and we won't forget. But as Castellan Vorbran used to say." Leonid finished the thought for him. "The enemy of my enemy is my friend." His voice was low, bitter. The smoke behind them rose in silence, and the scorched rails ahead gleamed with uncertain purpose. The path forward had changed, and there was no going back.